I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which Laura and I are meeting, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging. So today we're talking about the LGBTI resource, which is available on the Community Hub. Just to go back, I'm Shayla Stammers, this is Laura Bajoni. We work for the Knowledge Research and Insights team within the ADF. So what we're going to be doing today is going over a resource that is intended for LDATs when working with LGBTI communities. So we'll go through what does LGBTI mean, why does alcohol and other drugs, drug use in LGBTI communities matter, what factors contribute to differential use, and what does this mean for LDATs. Mm-hmm. I guess personal disclosure, I am a cis female who identifies as heterosexual, and I just want to put that out there for anybody who's listening that that's the lens from which I present. No pressure to do the same. If you want to, you can. But I think it's important to acknowledge our own, perspective in this space. So when it comes to LGBTI, the acronym, it stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex. I think that this term is actually missing Q and A, and the symbol plus.
This is a hot discussion in this space.
Yeah, so there is space for this to be modified. We'd love to hear from you if you'd like to let us know what you think. So today we normally have a Q&A box available within broadcast where you can list your questions and comments and interact with us to some degree. Today it's not working, so if you'd like to do that, you still can as you sit there at your computer and watch this. So we would love to hear from you through email, so druginfo@adf.org.au. There's a 30-second delay, so we'll see it as it comes through, but please do so if you feel that way. So basically, to go back to the acronym, the Q in this acronym represents a term that is really commonly used by young people. It stands for queer. It can also stand for questioning, which is probably less common, but it's associated with people who probably just don't fit the binary sort of system. Mm-hmm. I'm using a bit of lingo here, so hopefully that all makes sense. But the plus also represents all gender and sexual orientation identities that fit under this banner. Mm-hmm. The reason that we sort of try and include everybody in the acronym where we can is because it is really important to have recognition and identification in this space, and I guess to be represented when being spoken about. So anyone who's reading this, they want, it's comforting to see that, you're included in this resource. So, so that's where that comes from. Mm-hmm. The A, I didn't mention the A stands for asexual, but we can go through that. And there's some, key terms that we go through in the resource. So that's listed here.
Yeah, I was just going to make a joke about the teeny tiny text. Yes. This is just a copy of what is in the resource. Mm-hmm. It's the definition of terms. Sorry not to jump in.
No, that's okay. Terminology is really important because it helps people to identify specifically with where they fit in the world. And I think when you grow up in a world where there's, the widely accepted what's being called normal, it's really easy to find your place. But when that stuff doesn't fit, it's really important to have terminology where you can identify with something. So that's kind of the significance of it. I guess we won't go into the detail of what every single term means.
You can read the detail there. The one point that I would make, though, is that the acronym includes a mix of gender identity and sexual orientation, or non-orientation, mm-hmm. Which sometimes people are curious why, for example, when lesbian and gay and bisexual refer to sexual orientation, but mm-hmm. transgender, for example, refers to gender identity, why are they all included under the same banner? And, I think the agreed answer is that just supporting each other, mm-hmm. strength in numbers, that there's power when historically disenfranchised people come together as a group, and you have a louder voice together than any person has on their own.
Exactly. Well put. Okay, so
yeah, so why focus on this particular community? I want to say up front that no one has perfect data. We never have perfect data, and these are generalizations.
Yeah.
They will be true for some people. They will not be true for everyone.
Yeah.
But what the data indicates is that within the LGBTI community, the prevalence of alcohol and other drug use is typically higher. That initiation of alcohol and other drug use is typically earlier, by which we mean younger, and that there are potentially, because just sort of the laws of statistics, if more people are using alcohol and other drugs and more people start using alcohol and other drugs younger, typically you would expect to see higher rates of use, not only overall, but also higher rates of people who might experience dependence on alcohol and other drugs. Did that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, so those are some of the reasons why, we feel that this is an important community to pay attention to in this space.
Definitely. And often, like, if you think about it, we have a society that's really safe for people to be, like, in the binary world, so male or female, and identify as heterosexual. If you live in a world where most people identify that way, you may not feel safe to talk about other factors in your life. So if there's if prevalence of use of AOD is higher among this community, and we were talking about intersectionality with stigma, if you identify in different ways to different identities, I guess that can compound and impact your health outcomes. So yeah, anyway, I'm kind of getting into the nitty-gritty. Okay, so what factors contribute to differential use? Did you want to go? Should I do this bit?
I don't want to fight you for it. I know we're both pretty passionate about this. No, go for it.
Okay. Well, there is a lot behind this. I think it's safe to say that there is a really long history of oppression, criminalisation, violence against the community. It's very much ongoing everywhere. Anyone you speak to within this community will tell you that they've experienced stigma, that they've experienced all kinds of things when they're
discrimination.
When they're openly identifying as something within the acronym. And there's minority stress. So I'm pretty sure a lot of people will be familiar with this term, but basically what it means is that if you belong to minority, you're going to experience the stigma and the stress associated with being part of that. The other factors that contribute to differential use are around community social norms. So within the minority or within this group, there might be social norms that are different to outside of the group. So one example of this is sexualized drug use. So it might be common for a particular group within the LGBTI community to use particular types of drugs when interacting sexually, and that comes with potential harms associated with that may not be present for people who aren't part of the community. So that's a contributing factor. It might also be in response to, like, sometimes for community social norms, alcohol and drug use might be related to sort of coping mechanisms, I guess, as part of being in the minority stress situation.
I was going to say, again, like, to make a broad comment and recognizing up front that this is a generalization.
Yes.
There are lots of different reasons that people use drugs.
Definitely.
I believe that there are as many different reasons for using alcohol and other drugs as there are people who use alcohol and other drugs. But we do know that for some people, use of alcohol and other drugs is to help manage traumatic experience. So when you consider, and this is only for some people, but when you consider things like the disproportionately high rates of violence experienced by, for example, the transgendered community, and you consider the trauma that would be associated with that experience of violence, and sometimes ongoing violence and discrimination, there's just, I really think that considering that the experience of trauma and the minority stress and everything all together, it's just that it's a critical component of why we're talking about this and why we're talking about stigma as well.
Yeah, definitely. So what does this mean for LDATs, Laura?
Yes, so there's the end of the document aims to give some really practical, okay, we're on board, we agree, what do we do?
Yeah.
So there's, we actually quote from the Rainbow Tick Guide to LGBTI inclusive practice, and that goes through a number of steps that organizations can move through to say, what sort of an organization are we? How can we be more welcoming? How can we be more inclusive? And do that in a really practical way, you know, that helps organizations see those gaps and those rooms for improvement. So that's things like the organization's capability. What is the culture at your organization like? What is the language that's used in the office? What are the types of attitudes that people are expressing? Do you think that that's acceptable? Does the organization think that that's acceptable? Or is that something that needs to change? A way that can be changed is through things like workforce development. You know, whether that's training. I know that you've participated in some training through the Alcohol and Drug Foundation that you found really...
So there was a training offered through Turning Point.
Mm-hmm.
It was a one-day course offered by Thorn Harbour Health, which used to be Victorian AIDS Council. They offer I think it's twice a year. The first one is more introductory. The second one is a little bit more specific to like clinical practice, I think, in the health space. And yeah, it was really useful to sort of become familiar with terminology, social context, get a sense of, what are the common issues around AOD for people who identify as LGBTIQA+, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And like, even if I've done that sort of training before in other organisations as well, and every time you learn something new, or every time you have an experience or hear from somebody within the group that has a particular experience that really informs how you speak about it in the future. So there's always something to learn, and I would really encourage people to participate in stuff like that. If there's, opportunities within LDATs to offer that kind of training, then great.
And I think sometimes we can all be surprised when we're shown a different point of view, and we sort of are open to looking at the world through somebody else's eyes. And I remember you describing an exercise that was done about language use and how I don't want to steal your story. Yeah, but it's a good. I like this because it's a practical example of, okay, what do you mean by workforce development, and how can this start to change an organizational culture? Yeah,
so we did this activity where you sat down with one or two people and you spoke about your weekend, and they asked you questions, and you had to filter out any language that gave away your gender, the person that you're speaking about's gender, or sexual orientation, and speak in sort of neutral language, or gender neutral and sexual orientation neutral language. And it was really, really hard because it's so normal to just speak about people in a really binary way, because that's what our society's taught us. But it does, it sort of illustrated to us that for somebody who may not be openly identifying in their workplace, for example, let alone the rest of their life, that they have to filter their language constantly if they don't want to give that away, because they feel like they'd be discriminated against, or they don't feel safe, or they're not ready, or whatever reason they might have that's completely valid. The work that it takes to filter that out is pretty intense. So it was just a really useful activity to sort of frame the importance of safety.
Really, to consider the mental load that can have on employees if they're not in a safe and supportive environment.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, that translates to every other aspect of life, really, but workforce development is a really useful place because we spend a third of our lives at work.
Absolutely. And it's it's a really great opportunity to start changing the broader culture. By taking that workplace audience and saying, okay, how can we help start this conversation here and maybe open people's eyes to those other perspectives. And then hope that is also going to filter out into their other networks, to their family, to their friends, to their sporting club.
Captive audience.
Yeah, we love
ways.
we love workplaces because they are a captive audience in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So it's great to reach people like that.
Yeah.
Consumer participation is something else that is discussed, and that's getting members of the community involved. There's a range of ways that you can do that. One of those ways can be through workforce development, but really getting the voice of people with a lived experience of belonging to the community can really go a long way to starting that conversation and humanizing it as an issue. Having a welcoming and accessible organization, I mean, that's a lot of what we were just talking about, is that sense of safety, a feeling of belonging, of maybe not having to hide your identity.
That can also take the shape of like having people who are, if it's a clinical practice, for example, having people who are focused on that specific community in some way through their qualifications, or even things like having a sign out the front, like a rainbow flag, having a statement, or somebody gave an example at a training the other day where they spoke about a sporting club coach standing up in front of everybody and saying, for anyone who's participating today, I identify as a cis male and I'm straight, just letting you know where I'm coming from. And they spoke about how inclusive and open it was to let people know where you come from. That's why I did it today, because I think that's a really easy way to sort of demonstrate your understanding of inclusivity, and that involves understanding self-lens. So there's lots of different ways that are welcoming it. An organisation can be made welcoming and accessible.
I think that's a great example, and I am actively avoiding going down a rabbit hole of how our own internal lens colors everything that we see about the world. Yeah. So I won't. Next slide.
Okay.
But good point, Shayla.
Yes.
Did you want to?
Sure.
I can continue.
No, that's okay. So what does this mean for LDATs? So following the Rainbow Tick Guide is great. This can include disclosure and documentation.
Which is about privacy, really.
Yeah.
Just ensuring, and coming back to that safety, that if anything is disclosed or documented within the workplace, that people are confident that if, that their privacy is respected and their private life is respected.
Yeah, and I mean that goes down with like any aspect of a person's working life. Nobody has any right to share personal information regardless of what it is, including your bank account details. There's all kinds of information that our workplaces have about us, and this is definitely one of those pieces that is private. Culturally safe and acceptable services. So I guess that comes down to training and workforce development. We've talked about that already. Other inclusionary, that's a tricky word to say, strategies for working with LGBTI people.
There's just a range. There's just a range of different things, which is very organizationally specific, depending on, are you like on the ground,
they're just
are
tips.
you working
Okay.
Are you working face to face with people?
Yeah.
Sort of other things that your organization can do and participate in.
There's a little bit in here about terms to avoid as well, and I guess this is a good little space to plug the stigma resource. Similar to AOD related stigmatizing language, it's really important to have an understanding of what language is stigmatizing for people within the LGBTIQA+ community. So that's listed here.
Yep.
That's an easy way to kind of, I guess, become more inclusive as an organisation.
Yeah, and recognizing some of the international days of celebration and recognition, Pride generally.
And the other really important thing here, I think we haven't really talked about, is openly opposing homophobic and transphobic comments, or any kind of phobic, because you can put any part of this acronym in front of phobic and it exists. So when that's witnessed or seen by somebody, I think it's really important to call that out.
Yeah.
In a way that lets the person who might identify with one of those letters know that that's not okay.
Yeah, and sending that message.
Yeah.
That message, yes, that people are supported and that kind of behavior is not acceptable.
Exactly.
Yeah. And there are some, a couple of next step suggestions for organizations who want to take it a bit further, but there's lots more detail in the toolkit.
Yes. And I guess the other thing is, if you have any questions relating to this that might not make sense or that you want a little bit more detail on, reach out to your relationship manager. That's always a good starting point, and hopefully they'll direct you to us and we can provide a bit more info. But that's,
if we don't have the answers, hopefully
there is definitely organisations out there.
Yes, there absolutely are.
Yes.
Now that's the conclusion of this resource. Did you want to talk about using them as a suite a little bit at the end?
Sure. Yeah. So,
because the thing about the resources as opposed to the toolkits is that the resources are really applicable to LDATs, all LDATs, regardless of what specific activity they're involved in. So even if your activity is not specifically focused on the LGBTI community, everything that we just talked about can still inform our practice in the world. Us as people, us as professionals. Maybe we want to take it back to our organizations themselves and have that conversation. And stigma as well, another resource that's available, can be used to underpin all activities regardless of how focused or not they are on the issue of stigma.
Definitely. So I guess that goes for any resource within the LDAT, the community hub. So we have sort of three key resources that talk to each other. So there's Building Successful LDATs, a practical guide. There's the community action plan, and then there's all the toolkits. The resources are, like Laura mentioned, they're kind of interlinked across the board with those three. One of the other resources that's available is the life cycle planner. So that talks to, if you're right at the beginning, or I think people are writing CAPS at the moment, so you're thinking about what kind of activities you want to do. You've probably had a peruse through the toolkits already, but the life cycle planner is really handy when it comes to sort of identifying an age group that you're focusing on, and then having a look through the table as to what the risk factors are, what the protective factors are, and which toolkits and resources are relevant to that particular age group. So there's a couple of things, there's a lot of things on the community hub that are worth checking out. Obviously everybody has a lot on and is very busy, but we do encourage people to have a flick through all of the toolkits, because there might be something there that you just didn't know was there that you might find really useful. A lot of them do refer to each other, so all the resources that like the resources we talked about today, as well as the toolkits, will reference another resource or another toolkit where appropriate. So you will be kind of prompted to have a look at others anyway, but we encourage people to go through and have a detailed look, essentially. Again, if you have any questions about any of them, or you see something that's not quite right and you think that maybe we've missed something, we do encourage that feedback. So reach out to your relationship manager and say, hey, in the, education toolkit, I noticed that there's a typo, or I noticed that there is this really great program that I've been working with for years that's really awesome that we would recommend. That
could be included, absolutely.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. You definitely inform this work as well. It doesn't happen in isolation, so yeah, we definitely want to hear from you.
We had set time aside for questions, but having a technical malfunction with our Q&A box, as we've stated, so we're gonna wrap it up. And if anybody again has those questions or comments after the fact, please do send it through to us.
It is not a closed conversation, it's a very open conversation. We definitely encourage everybody to reach out if you need to. We'll be uploading these webinars online within the next couple of days. So we encourage people to check it out and share if they think any of their colleagues would want to see it after this. That kind of concludes it for this financial year. So I guess I'm not really sure if we're going to have one next month, but stay tuned. We'll see you soon. Thank you very much for joining us.